Already done our introduction. Um, as you know, this is part of our ongoing series on case management fundamentals. We started almost 2 months ago, or a little over 2 months ago, with an overview of the homelessness system. And we spoke specifically about continuum of care programs, ESG programs, and the structure that supports CFC operations. And then we focused in our next training on the intake assessment process and developing housing plans. So at the very beginning of engagement and connecting with people and the different roles for maybe an outreach worker versus a rapid rehousing case manager. We then shifted gears a bit and talked about trauma responsive care, recognizing that many people, most in fact, experiencing homelessness, have some kind of trauma that's actively impacting the way in which they engage or their ability to participate in programming. And our awareness of trauma and how it plays out is really helpful in developing effective engagement strategies and housing plans. Last time we spoke about housing focused practices, which is essentially a euphemism for housing first, and how preconditions or expectations around elements that have to be met before they can enroll in projects tend not to be that effective. And a more impactful evidence-based approach is where there are no preconditions and we just provide housing as a foundation. But we talked also about the importance of not just housing, but housing with the appropriate intensity of services packaged with that housing to enable people to be successful. So our focus today are these meaningful engagement strategies for harder to serve clients. And when we think of harder to serve clients, it can be anyone who is just not responsive, not attending meetings, continually sort of dropping off, or it could be someone who's very much participating, but they're not participating in a way that's demonstrating the agreed upon objectives that were in their housing plan. So it doesn't always mean it's an active or untreated substance use or it's an active and untreated mental illness. Unresponsiveness or hard to serve clients plays out in different ways. And across all of these, whether they're sort of high functioning but not responsive, or maybe, in the midst of some untreated behavioral health condition that's really impacting their ability to just function in day-to-day life, motivational interviewing is a useful way to sort of break through and across that spectrum. So that's what we're going to be focusing on today. I've already introduced myself and Andrea. We've talked a little bit about motivational interviewing. I'll provide a bit of an overview for the stages of change, which is a foundation for motivational interviewing and understanding where people are in either contemplating making a change or agreeing to substantive adjustments to behavior, to things that are their goals, or actively participating or not actively participating. So there's sort of a range of different stages, and we'll walk through those. Your awareness of those stages of change is really helpful, primarily because it helps you understand that the response that the participant or the client is having to your case management is often not related to what you personally, and oftentimes we might take it personally that they're not participating, they're not showing up at a meeting, they're not doing what they said they were going to do. But understanding the stages of change provides a way into understanding a lack of motivation, not so much as a failure on the case manager's part, but just recognizing that that's a natural progress in how people make behavioral changes. We'll also focus a lot on these motivational interviewing techniques and then talk about client-centered housing plans at the end. So given that, I'm going to jump in. So stages of change. I think this is probably a focus that is familiar to many of you. Stages of change is essentially a framework for understanding and managing how behavior change process occurs. The model and you can see from the graphic here, the model explains how people adopt new behaviors over time, but not always in a sequential kind of step by step. And so, although the model shows this as a progression, we need to understand the stages of change or making a change, not as a linear process, but often as a process where there's, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. So change is gradual. It's not a single event, and the progress isn't linear. People are going to move up through these stages of change and then back down. The first is what we call this pre-contemplation stage. This is where we're helping the client just by raising awareness. We provide gentle feedback, reflective listening around what it is that's going on in their life, and we're just reflecting back whether or not that's aligned with what they want and what their values are. And we're encouraging behavioral change, but we're not mandating it, and we're not creating rigid expectations that they must participate or they must do something. The thing to remember about this pre-contemplation stage is that it can last a long time. People can linger in pre-contemplation for 6 months, sometimes even longer. So what we might interpret as stagnation or a lack of progress is this level of comfort or this building awareness and a level of understanding that the participant has around what is it that they're doing that might be contributing or inhibiting a change that they're hoping to achieve. The next stage is this contemplation, and this is where we help the clients explore what are the pros and cons. So they haven't actually committed yet, but we're just kind of understanding, well, you like drinking, you like hanging out with your friends, but that might be that's creating some tension with your landlord or with your neighbors. So we're just exploring the pros and cons. So what if you cut back? And we'll talk more about this. Again, there's not a sort of a contract that a rigid expectation that they must do some change or they must exhibit some change. We're just contemplating those sort of pros and cons, and we're trying to tip the balance in favor of making a change and helping them explore how the cons are detrimental and the pros might outweigh that. Then the next stage is this preparation, and this is where the client is starting to articulate their intentions. They're starting to make plans, and we're supporting that. We're helping to build out a plan, maybe offer some specificity to what that plan might be for changing in the immediate future, cutting back on their drinking, maybe drinking outside of the apartment, so it's not causing tension within it. Whatever those changes are, and we're starting to build a plan for what that might look like and how they're going to manage those behaviors when it feels overwhelming to them. And then then finally we move into action. And this is actively modifying the behavior. Okay, we agree that the drinking is kind of inhibiting your tendency, the confidence that you're going to be able to maintain tendency. So you've agreed that you're going to cut back or you're going to change where you drink, and we're going to start actively modifying the behavior and then kind of testing how that feels and how that plays out and what those expectations are. So we're looking at modifying the behavior or the environment where they are or the experience or the outcome that the behavior has. So all of those things. And then in the maintenance phase, this is where we're practicing ongoing practice with that behavior change, with the acknowledgement that there's always going to be slips. There's always going to be challenges. There's always going to be, oh, there was a Friday night, guys came over, I didn't plan it, but it just happened and I was having a good time. And then, so this awareness that it's not necessarily a reflection on poor case management, and it's not a reflection that the client doesn't want to achieve the ultimate behavior change. But those sort of relapses or those kind of slips are expected, and that's part of the stages of change, and we just need to expect that and manage that. Okay, so we've done some research, and this behavior change is an evidence-based approach, and if we have this poll ready, I think this is going to be an interesting. So based on research, based on what we know from people who've quit smoking, quit drinking, lost weight, done whatever the behavior change that they were going to do, if people who are struggling to make that change, what's the most significant motivating factor that actually contributes to this change?
So I think we've got a small enough group. Let's chat
Okay.
about this. I'm curious what people think.
Okay. Which one is most indicative of actually making a behavior change? Does anyone want to sort of pose a guess? Strong personal meaning or intrinsic value, something that is personally meaningful to you. You have to have a crisis or you have to hit rock bottom. And that's often a phrase that comes up in recovery meetings. People have to they have their bottom where they finally just, I can't do this anymore. A perceived threat or vulnerability. And we see this often in violence and family violence and DV, where it gets so bad that you have to make a change because it's just a personal safety issue. Other times that you have to have confidence. You're not able to make that change until you develop a sense of that you could actually follow through. And so there's you have to have a personal level of confidence, or It's reward based. There has to be something on the end. I want to wear that dress to my reunion. I want to be able to play in the park with my kids, so I'm going to quit smoking so I can breathe better. Okay, so I'm seeing four. A couple of people have two or four.
One or four, one of the person people has.
One or four. Okay. Any other thoughts? One and four and two and four are close.
It's hard, right, Matt? Because all of these things could trigger change, but what you're really looking for is what what makes long-term change, right?
Yeah. Okay. I hope I'm saying this right. Jonice Fernandez, she
Yes.
said all. It is sort of a trick question. So I apologize for pulling one on you guys. The answer is all or any combination of these. It's very personal. The evidence shows that there isn't one single motivator that's directly related to change because
Mm.
everyone is different. And what motivates everyone and what keeps people motivated is a very personal, it's a personal thing. So it may be that for you personally, you need a reward. You need to have some kind of concrete benefit that you're going to get at the end of this to motivate you to stay with that change. But that could be meaningless to a client or to someone else. That's not what motivates them. They need to hit rock bottom. They need to feel like they cannot go any lower than they are. So just the awareness that these motivators are going to be reflective of each individual and their experience and their desires. And part of our approach to case management and motivational interviewing might be to just ask some open-ended questions and reflective listening to drill down and to figure out what would motivate someone to make a change. So knowing that any one or a combination of these could be a driver is going to be helpful in understanding how to interact with your client and how to kind of design an approach that would make most sense for them.
Hey, Matt, one of the things that helps me sometimes is that you don't have to have every single one, or you don't have to have the
Yeah,
best one. It's the combination for the person, and that it sometimes changes, right?
yeah, yeah,
That's so interesting that you say that, Andrea, because I was just thinking about myself and like some of my family and friends and like what has motivated me or people I know to change, like to make
Yeah,
certain changes that I'm thinking of. And you're right, it can be different based on the situation and like what the change is that's needed.
yeah.
yeah. So this is helpful context. Now we're going to switch gears a little bit, but I think having this foundation of going into motivational interviewing. So what is motivational interviewing? What are the techniques? Walking through the sort of component parts of it. Having this understanding around the stages of change and how every person is different is going to be useful as you start to deploy these strategies and these techniques. And so on the next slide, I think, Andrea, if you want to jump in and
Yep.
just walk through motivational interviewing.
So let's talk about a motivational interviewing a little bit. So that, change is not easy and people approach change. Also, what Matt was saying is mourning the loss of what they're losing. If you're going to do positives and negatives, you're going to see negatives of change, and that oftentimes people have that in their own head, which causes ambivalence. So, what we want to do is help make it as client centered as possible, meaning that we're going to look at what's motivating them for change, which the poll started. We're also going to look at what their plan is for the future and what they think change looks like. And we're going to talk about some goal setting. And then we're going to look at the ambivalence and the mixed feelings people have. We're also going to focus on partnership. We're going to focus on empathy. We're going to recognize that people have things to lose when they change behavior, and that we're not going to direct people, or as Matt said, give them one way to do it, but we're going to focus on partnership and work together or alongside the person to make the change. It helps people identify their own reasons and articulate their own reasons, which is going to clear up some of the ambivalence. And we're going to use it to align housing plans. And I just want to say a word about ambivalence is that if it's the worker's goal and the client's behavior, there's no ambivalence, right? So, for instance, one of the things that I see is oftentimes we have housing stabilization as one of the goals, and what we're trying to address is their difficulty with the landlord. Well, if stabilization is not a priority or not their real goal, and let's face it, the things you have to do to become stable in housing aren't exactly sexy, then that's not going to generate the level of ambivalence. But if we talk about that their real goal is to, move their family in with them longer term, not right away, or get a girlfriend or a boyfriend or buy a car. Those are goals that people can feel. And that's when we're going to get that level. So we have to really dig deep in terms of the things that people want, right? Which is individualized, though generally they go through honey, money, and wheels, right? And we're going to focus on those things and connect them with the goals we put in the housing plan. So there's the connection with the housing plan, and we're going to talk about more about it. So we're always going to talk about those felt goals in the housing plan, and we're going to get more concrete goals as we structure the housing plan. Does that make sense? Yes, no,
Yeah.
hopefully. Okay, let's go to the next one. All right. So we talked a little bit about ambivalence, right? That's hesitation, missed appointments, right? I'm tired of being outside, but landlords always reject me. Okay. There's a thing, right? People say they want housing, right? But, they're scared or they have had bad experiences. Shelter isn't great, but I know what to expect. I have friends there. Losing friends and loneliness, the anticipation of loneliness in housing is a big negative motivator. I want to move, but people wouldn't be able to help me, wouldn't be able to manage without me. Losing role. Those are things we need to be aware of. I want to be in my own place, but I don't think I'll be able to keep up with rent and bills. Yes, it's a whole new structure and how we're going to help them. And that sounds good, but I've heard this story before, not trusting in the fact that they're going to move. These are all great examples of ambivalence or negative feelings that might be attached to some of the goals we talk to people about. They're not game changers, right? They're the first part of stages of change. So people have to resolve or at least trust to leap over these really negative feelings that people are having and resolve some of that ambivalence. So we're going to think about this. These are completely normal. Think about it in your own life. Sarah gave a good example, right? We think about how people make changes in our own life, or we make changes in our own life. There's always that, negative voice in your head, so that we are going to be aware of this and expect it and be prepared to help people resolve them. Okay, let's go to the next one, or at least trust enough to move past
Mhm.
them. So one of the things that we're trying to do here through MI is move past compliance-based plans to client-driven plans. You know what? The truth is, as a case manager, I could usually, if I was standing with somebody, get them to do what I wanted. That was absolutely true. But you know what? The minute I was gone, that didn't resolve, right? So that one of the things that we want to do is, can we structure it or force it? Yeah. Does that sometimes take? Yeah. But if they're client driven plans, people internalize this process and the change is more likely to stick. We don't want people only to make changes, anybody in our lives or people we're working with or people we're working for. We don't want people to make these kinds of changes just because we're standing there, right? Because we don't want a case management oriented change process. What we want is, we don't want to be the focus of people's lives, right? We want them to be the focus on people's lives. So that's what we're working towards. So this includes encouragement. It also includes trust. It includes trust with us, because just because we're not, compliance driven doesn't mean we don't guide people. Absolutely, part of our job is to guide people, and people have got to trust some of that and trust enough to take a leap. They've also got to have hope. It also supports realistic, sustainable housing goals. So people have got to trust the input that we're giving people. And it helps people respond to and start to resolve ambivalence in a process with us instead of resisting. Okay. So confrontation, there we go. So let me give one of Matt's examples. So this is the first one, right? Remember we talked about stages of change and people aren't, that people don't realize that there's a problem and we're trying to get people to look at the problem. So one of the ways we can do this is confrontation. So let me give you an example of that. You look like you've been drinking. Yeah, anybody had this experience? Said to a client, you look like you've been drinking. And the client says back to you, you look like you've been drinking. Okay. Then what are you going to do? What's your next step? Right? But if you say to people, hey, you look a little unsteady there. Can I help you? Let's talk about that, right? We're going to talk about what's going on. Ask them what's going on. Ask them open-ended questions. What's going on? What are you feeling right now? Ask them those kinds of questions, and maybe you can raise, oh, I've been drinking a lot and I don't feel so great. Okay, now we have something to work on. But the you look like you've been drinking, we got nothing to work on. Okay, let's go to the next one. So, motivational techniques help staff. In what way? People, sometimes as case manager, look, as a case manager, I'm a controlling person, right? And most case managers like a little bit of control, and we want to be able to help people, right? And sometimes our feelings of competence are based on that. Motivational interviewing recognizes that we are not the nexus of people's lives, that this comes from them and it allows them control. And our goal is a helper, right? Which is really the case management goal. So it reduces that frustration when people say things like, no, I'm not going to do that. No, I'm not going to move into housing. No, I'm not going to pay my rent. What are we going to do? It's a process and we're going to work towards it, which is really our jobs. It's not our jobs to fix things right away, right? So rather than engaging in these attempts to change someone, though there are times when we have to fix things when it's a crisis, right? I'm not ruling out fixing things, but if we're looking for change, right, the person has to be actively involved. It avoids backing people into our point of view, right? Divisiveness, temporary compliance. The minute they get out of my site, they do something else, right? It helps avoid frustration and and it helps people feel like we're working together. So it sets us up for the next thing. Because believe me, every time we're trying to exercise stages of change, it's not going to be the last time that there needs to be a change. There are a lot of changes as people adjust to housing. And it finally breaks down our illusion that we are responsible and we are totally the one in control, because we're not. This is another person. You know, and that we are not the only thing that generates control. We are a factor in it. We're a big factor in it. But I always ask people, you ever got in a relationship with somebody, there were a few little changes you wanted to make? And how'd that work out for you? Right. Why should your personal life be so much different, right, than this life? People are not going to make changes for you. People are going to make changes for them. And motivational interviewing ultimately recognizes that.
So if the sort of baseline is motivational interviewing is the technique we want to try and deploy all the time, but you indicated that there are some of these sort of
Yes.
crisis, like where is that line when you're like, okay, you have to do like this is unacceptable, or how do you draw that line, or how do you decide like
It's a line about danger and risk, right?
okay.
So if somebody is suicidal, you are not going to employ motivational interviewing. You are going to do something to get them help immediately. If somebody is making threats against another person or violent, you're not going to apply you're not going to apply motivational interviewing. I don't know if you've ever worked with anybody in a fight, but if somebody's in a fight, you're not going to say, so how are you feeling about this? You're going to say, okay, we're going to stop this. We're going to employ everything in our power. And a thing that implies risk but doesn't imply ultimate danger is in some cases, we're going to recognize that people can't make decisions in their own best interest. So, an example of that is if people, if we're every indication means that people want to stay in housing, but they can't pay rent, right? Or that they're too ambivalent about giving up something else that they want, right? In some cases, or even psychotic and believing that in the case of a lot of people I worked with in permanent supportive housing, they believe they own the building. So why would you pay rent? Well, okay, so, but clearly they needed this, and it was a decision that was shared with a treatment team, but
Mhm.
we pursued rep payee. So those are examples where you would take over, but it's a considered example, and it's if people can't make decisions in their own best interest, right? But it's not these step by step by step. And first, you apply motivational interviewing techniques in most cases, except for the active danger like suicidality or threats against another person. And then you may come to the fact that this is not possible, but yeah.
Okay.
So everybody's motivated by unique factors. We thought about that for a little bit, right? Compliance doesn't equal change. We think about that a little bit, right? We have all had people who do things we ask them, but then when they're not there, somebody has to own it. And that motivation fluctuates. So this is really important. Somebody can be gung ho to do something, and then the next day, situations change, or sometimes it's the next minute. Situations change, their perception changes. So you start sort of the process, you start to talk through the things. It's usually faster in that case, but it's something that we want to do. And we need to realize that this is not usually a failure on the case manager's part. It's just because, people think things through and other things occur to them. So we may just need to slow down the process. One of the big things that I learned from motivational interviewing is sometimes the case manager and the client themselves need to take a breath, right? Just take a breath, sit down, think about it for a minute, realign, explain it to each other. And that motivation can be influenced. This is critically important, both by the case manager and outside forces, but it doesn't reside solely in the person. This is a mutual process, which I hope is one of the things that's really coming across in this presentation. It's a mutual process. It's not completely under the control of any one person. Okay.
So what do you do then when you're interacting with a client and they're expressing strong interest in change and they're so
Yep.
motivated and they're everything on their plan they agree to and they're yes, I'm going to do this. I'm so glad this is so helpful. And then as soon as you walk away, nothing. And then this repeats over and over again where they're
Yep.
expressing motivation, but they're not demonstrating change.
Yep. And this happens all the time. And when I was a case manager, it was like finally somebody realizes that this is what's necessary, right? I need to get sober. Oh, honey, yes, you do, right? Let's work on this together, right? And usually I would jump on it. My advice to you is when that happens, don't jump on it. Let them explain it to you, right? Let
Okay.
them explain it to you why. Let them take you along. This is a mutual process. They should explain it to you why. Let them explain to you, let them make a plan, right? How are they going to do that, right?
Hmm.
And weigh it out with them. Is that, I mean, in supportive housing, I had somebody who came in and said, one day, yeah, I'm going to get sober and stuff. They've been a whole lot of trouble just for the back thing. I'm going to get sober. This is ridiculous. I'm tired of this. I'm tired of this. And I thought, oh, thank God. So I'm like, okay, here we go. Here are two detoxes. We're going to try to get you in detox. And the first thing the person said was, why are you always talking about detox? I'm going to call you Miss Detox from now on. So it taught me something, right? And he did for a year. But he taught me something is that I went too fast, right?
Okay.
So I should have asked him why, what's going on. And I should have thought about he's in a lot of trouble. He doesn't want to be in trouble with me, right? So why doesn't he tell me this? And you know what? Did he make me happy? Yes, he did. And people know how to make us happy, right? But we need to slow it down and ask the questions. And
Okay.
that's one of the hard, it's a really good question because that's one of the hardest things you can do. Somebody finally gets it and you hear them talk about it, right? And you think, thank God. But you know what? It's a lot of times not real. But if it is real, that's great. But then they'll be able to talk it through with you.
Okay. Great.
Okay. So here we go. Here's some things we talked about. Ambivalence is normal. Absolutely. In our regular lives, in any kind of lives, ambivalence is normal. It can be resolved by talking it through with the person, their intrinsic motivations and their values. Absolutely true. But you know what? It's not always fast. And that's something we have to realize, right? And that we can guide people through asking them the questions. It's a collaborative partnership. Yep. It's empathetic. Empathetic, this is important. I'm sure you guys know this, but there's a big difference between empathy and sympathy. And empathy is trying to put yourself in the person's shoes, trying to understand. And that's a key factor here. Can also be directive, right? We can give people suggestions, but we talk them through the positives and negatives of each suggestion. It's a counseling style that provides conditions. By the way, some of the stuff you're going to hear about motivational interviewing is allowing large silences and sort of stuff like that. That's really a therapy technique, right? We're not going to allow those large silences because it's really hard for people who have been so close to crisis or in crisis right now to tolerate those. We're going to adapt these techniques. The ones that we're telling you, the spirit of MI, and we're absolutely going to use these, but the full therapy techniques may not be appropriate for people that are that close to crisis, which are most homeless people and ex-homeless people. I never call anybody ex-homeless, but it was just for the purpose of that sentence.
Yeah.
Um, it's a direct argument and confrontation often gets people in a position where they're fighting back, and you don't want that sort of tension through this. It's an explaining technique, and a lot of the explaining comes from the people we serve. Okay. Hope. You know what? If you've been homeless, been in crisis most of your lives, that's something that most people go through, right? And that's important part of this, so that we want to think about that hope is a very tough thing to do. People are scared to hope, right? So hope and confidence in your own abilities are key to motivational interviewing. So hope involves trust. It involves trust in the relationship with the case manager. And if it means hope for goals that might be realistic to them and mean something to them. And confidence means being able to identify the possibility of success within yourself, right? And the history of success within yourself. And that if we can instill those things with people, they're more likely to follow through on change. It also has to be meaningful to people. It has to be something they can relate to. You know, my housing plans as a case manager included things like housing stabilization. And then one day somebody said to me, "Can you ask the people you serve to explain what housing stabilization is?" And you should have heard the answers, right? So we started changing them a little bit. We started talking about what they mean. We started looking for long-term goals, and it's very different. Because one of the things that Matt said is that sometimes the reward or the goal is something that moves people along, and people do different things for a reason. People don't change unless they get something out of it. It's important for us to understand what they get out of it.
Mhm.
Okay. So we want to express empathy through reflective listening. Just let me say a word about a reflective listening is that I mean, I took all the classes on reflective listening and I always had a hard time with it not feeling stilted. You can do it the way you want, but the idea here is to understand what people say And I'm going to tell you what I say is I usually say, okay, I'm going to write this in a sentence. Help me with this. So let's look at this sentence together. So then, because they always tell you don't let your voice go up at the end of the sentence like it's a question, or don't ask people questions. So I put it in a sentence, whatever way is most comfortable with you. But the idea here is that you understand what they're saying and give people the opportunities to correct you. You want to develop discrepancy between the person's goals and their values and current behavior. Yes, absolutely. But the person's goal has to mean something about them. I'm going to go back to that housing stabilization goal again. How does this not further housing stabilization? I'm not saying housing stabilization is a bad goal. I'm saying we've got to get a better understanding of it, right? And what it means to the person. So it's hard to develop discrepancy in goals that people can't feel. So we're going to really attempt to do that. We're going to avoid that direct confrontation because that encourages people to push back, and then you're in a push me, pull you situation. We're going to adjust to their resistance rather than opposing it directly. And sometimes that's hard. People say they don't want to ask why instead of, yes, you do. You told me yesterday you wanted it, right? Which is tempting. We're going to support people moving forward with their own intrinsic motivation, right? It's supporting self-efficacy, people making decisions, but also supporting optimism, which is hard to get to, right? If you've been in crisis all your lives, if you've never felt like you've gotten things, optimism is hard. Optimism goes with hope, but we're going to really support this in every interaction. You know what? If we believe in people before they believe in themselves, it's more likely to move it towards that. Okay. So here's reflective listening. We talked about that a minute. It's really seeking to understand. We talked about that. It's restraining the or person's own ideas in a statement rather than a question. We're going to look for the meaning, not just the words. We're going to look for repeating it. We're going to use tentative statements that aren't a question, which was really hard for me. I don't know if that it absolutely makes sense to you, but it makes sense to different people in different way. Like it sounds like you're feeling stuck at the shelter. That's a good, right? So that I might put that in writing. You might say something like, so it sounds like to me this is something you seem worried. Okay, so you're not worried, you seem worried. All right, because the last place you had didn't work out. Those are all good things, and people have an opportunity to correct it, which is important to me about reflective listening. But they also have an opportunity to expand it, which is something that you also want to look for.
Is there a limit, maybe not a limit is the right way to ask, but in reflective listening when it feels like the person is sort of just ranting and then they start to sort of cycle back and you're like hearing similar arguments over and over again and engaging them further doesn't seem to advance any kind of coherent discussion or plan. They're just sort of like the passive listening seems to activate just
Sure.
like they're just like a wind-up toy. I mean, I don't like to say it in that sort of dismissive way, but it doesn't feel like it's building rapport. It doesn't feel like it's progressing. It just feels like you're like in a churn.
Sure. I might respond to what they're feeling or what I'm feeling. So, I mean, I hear you, and I think, or it sounds to me like you want to make sure I understand this, and I want to understand it too, right?
Hmm.
But let's talk about some of the core things you talked about. And sometimes I say, which is not technically reflective listening, sometimes I don't feel listened to either, and I tend to repeat things, right? So, can we try a different way to make sure I hear what you're saying? Because I know how important that is. So,
Hmm.
you're going to try to join with the person and you're going to try to slow it down. Sometimes you can also reflect on your own experience. You know what? That's a lot for me to take in right now, and what you're saying is really important to me. Can we can we talk about maybe two things or three things and then make
Okay.
sure I understand it? So just join with the person and figure out sort of what they're trying to do. It's entirely possible that they're not trying to make sure that you're saying it, that they're trying to do something else, but then you ask them. If they say, no, no, that's not what I'm trying to do. Okay, Tell me what you're trying to do here, right?
Hmm.
So that it's a technique that you can also use for sort of the message that people are going to get across and not just in a sentence, right?
Hmm. Okay.
Does that make sense to y'all?
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah. Okay. So some of the tools in in motivational interviewing are things like OARS, and there's going to be a couple of other ones. But OARS are just a reminder that we're going to ask open-ended questions, right? What do you think about that? It's affirming that you've heard the person, but also affirming what they're saying and from their own experience. It's also reflective listening that we just talked about, and then sometimes it's summarizing. So we're going to check out assumptions, and Matt and I just did a little bit of that, right? We're going to check out assumptions that we're making. But one of the things that we talked about before is the person says all the things that you want to hear, right? Like, I'm going to get sober or I'm going to pay my rent, and then check it out, right? You're assuming that that's something they've decided to do. Let's check it out. It's an environment of empathy, understanding where people are coming from. And you know what? The other thing is, most importantly, you don't have to agree. Motivational interviewing is like being in a car and the person we serve is driving and we don't have a wheel and we don't have brakes and we don't have anything. But we're going to talk people through it, right? They're guiding it. And that we don't necessarily have to agree and where they're going unless it's dangerous, right? And that we talked about is an exception to this, right? But we can try it. And lots of times people have tried a technique that I thought, oh my God, this will never work. But I followed along with people. And you know what? Sometimes it works, sometimes it didn't. And then we could turn the car around and try something else. And we also have to be aware of how we're coming across and what our tone is. And that makes a big difference because that communicates things. You know, when I was a case manager, I was never sure if people actually heard anything I said, right? But the shock to me is they want to make us happy, right? Or they want to make us off their backs at least. And that people are very sensitive to the signals we give across. So we need to really watch our tone and our body language because that can counteract the stuff that like the empathy and the reflective listening. If we're, basically rolling our eyes with our body or our tone, it's a different thing. So we need to watch it.
I was in preparation for this, I was thinking about how I would use these open-ended, affirming, reflective
Hmm.
listening, and summarizing. And the example that came to my mind, I have a 5-year-old grandson
Hmm.
who's taking swimming lessons. He desperately wants to go to the big kids pool where he
Yeah.
all his friends are playing, and he's stuck in the baby pool because there are certain criteria. You have to be able to like swim to the side, put your face in the water. So he's so motivated to get to that big kid pool, and he's stuck in the baby pool, but he has to do these things in the lessons. And in the lesson, he won't put his face in the water. He doesn't want to get his face wet. He doesn't want to jump in. He doesn't want to do those things that are required of him. But he's so motivated by being with his friends in the big kid pool. So I'm just trying to like, well, what's scary about this? How do you, it sounds like you're like, are you afraid you're not going to, be able to touch? Because you can touch. You wouldn't be able to get to the side because you can't, you know how to swim to the side. So there's this disconnect between what they're expressing as their goal and what seems to be the barrier, why they're not pursuing it. But in each of the instances where I was trying to explore, what is it that's like the barrier here? What is it that's inhibiting progress? I think it just comes down to fear of failure. There's like
Sure.
the fear of drowning essentially. But I
Sure.
wasn't sure how do I move beyond that in these like, I mean, he's 5, he's eventually going to learn how to swim. And it's not like, this is like a crisis.
Yeah.
But I'm just thinking like, okay, if I were trying to do motivational interviewing here to explore, how do I then use this reflective listening, kind of summarizing what's freaking him out to move him to the next stage? Help
Yeah.
my
So,
kid.
huh?
Help me figure out how to help my kid.
There's a couple of things. So you did all the things right, right? Is you
Mm,
checked out a couple of things, right?
mm,
You might want to ask him if he's ever had an experience where he did put his face in the water.
mhm.
or he did swim to the side or did do some of those
Hmm.
things, right? So, and it's counterintuitive. So, it's a really good example with a 5-year-old because we see a lot of those things sometimes. Like, I've
Hmm.
seen a 5-year-old jump off the side of the big pool, right? Because they knew somebody would catch them, but they're afraid to let go in the small pool where they can
Uh-huh.
easily touch, right? Okay. All right, so we want to figure out like what inspires him and what it would be like to swim with the other kids in the big pool. But we
Hmm.
also want to figure out like if he's ever had an experience of success with the other things. So with kids, like I would probably use like, has he ever put his face in the water in the bathtub? Right? Or
Uh-huh.
maybe it's like scary because every time his face gets wet in the bathtub, shampoo goes in his eyes
Uh-huh.
and it hurts, right?
Uh-huh.
So we can try different things. So ask him about his own experiences. Ask him to tell you the story. Sometimes we ask people in an open-ended question like, man, this seems really hard, right? Has there been something that you thought was really hard that you overcame and it was successful, right? So we ask them to tell us that story. Is there some crisis you overcame? This is slowing down the process, and we have to realize this. And a lot of times we do slow down the process. If there was something they successfully overcame, right? Remember when you were learning how to ride a bike?
Hmm.
Can you tell me what that was like? And was it scary? And those things. Let them
Hmm.
tell you the story. And then ask him if there were situations, or ask the clients mainly if there are situations, probably not with a 5-year-old just because of the way they think, but you want to talk to the clients about things that didn't go well or things that didn't resolve
Yeah.
and ask them to advise you where they could have used more help. Right? So you're setting the tone that this is going to be different from other case managers, and that's really important, right? So you're going to ask them where they needed more help. Um, it's a little bit too, just because of the way that 5-year-olds think, it's a little bit too much with 5-year-olds, but it definitely works with clients is to ask them that.
Hmm.
Actually, I don't know if people will be interested, but we've got a couple of key open-ended questions that we put together in this. How do you get to a crisis plan for another case management thing? I can send it to you, and if people are interested in that, we're happy to
Okay.
send it to you.
Yeah. Well, we'll go on. I mean, I thought it was somewhat applicable, but I will
It's
report back if I can
absolutely
get
applicable.
if I can get Frankie to jump in the deep part.
Oh, I hope Frankie gets in the pool with his buddies.
Yes.
Okay. So you want to hear what you want to elicit people to talk about change. Discover reasons that change will matter to them personally. Where do you see yourself over the next year? Who do you want in your life? Ask people to dream, which, like I said, like hope is a big leap for people. Dreaming is a big leap for people. And dreaming may mean half an hour from now, 10 minutes from now. It may mean a week from now. What would be different, right? So this is all leading up to one of these things. Can you imagine if you did make the change? I'm not going to make the change. Okay, so, what would it look like if you were advising someone else, if they were going to make a change? What would it look like? What are the possible advantages? What would be different if you didn't? Would there be anything that changed? You also want to look back about strategies used in the past, past successes, which is something we just talked about. And you also want to ask the person about their hopes for the future. How would they like things to be different? What's achievable? What are the options right now? That's a really important conversation. We actually sort of call this the so that conversation that we're going to talk about. So that one of the case managers who we were doing a training with said that, you know what, I always ask my clients if they say a goal, anything from sobriety to housing, right? You want housing so that what happens, right? And that's when you get the goals that mean something to them and you can connect it back to the goal that they're connecting it to. So, for instance, if I get in housing, I want housing so that I get a girlfriend or boyfriend, which is a very common goal, right? Let's be clear, we're not asking you to be Match.com, right? We're not asking you to hook people up with girlfriends or boyfriends. But if that's one of their goals is to have somebody there for them, right? Okay. So let's figure that out, right? So let's talk about it, right? if that would be different, what would that look like? That sort of thing. Okay, what are the possibilities right now? Right? Right now, you're moving into supportive housing. It's a one person thing. How can we use that supportive housing to get to a place where you might be able to live with somebody else? Or if it's possible you're able to live with somebody else, let's talk about those. So it opens it up to a conversation about options when you understand what's really motivating people to do that, or what are the things that are important to them that they may see coming out of them. And it also encourages people's hope because we're not dismissing it. Oh no, you can't have a girlfriend or boyfriend in this housing. Well, maybe not, but how can you use this housing to get to a point where you could have that option? So
Mhm.
that's something that we want to do. Okay.
Okay.
By the way, that's the most common. Okay. We also want to give people an idea and help us get an idea of what's important to them. And then we're going to try to move these things around. So somebody is in trouble in housing. So they're in trouble, I take it from this, that from their friends coming over. All right. And they're drinking with their friends coming over. And what happens when people are drinking and their friends come over in housing? They probably attract a lot of attention, right? All right. So let's figure this out. So let's figure out what are the most important. Keeping housing is an eight, right? Is it really an eight? Tell me why you want to keep housing, right? Tell me what's important to you about housing. And then you can add things. You know, I noticed you really like cooking sometimes and that it's nice that this place has a kitchen. Is that important to you? Those sorts of things. You're not threatening to take their housing away. You're just making it, we're going to work on you keeping housing. Okay. It's important that your friends come over. That's a 10. It's important that you drink. That's a 10. So you're going to have those conversations. What's important about your friends coming over? Actually, I was pretty surprised in one of the conversations that I had with a client when we were talking about friends coming over and drinking, right? Is that, okay, so part of it is the friends are noisy. So you know, what's really important about your friends coming over? And what he said to me is when my friends come to my house, they bring the booze. But when I go to their house, I have to bring the booze. And I thought, oh, well, that's a pretty powerful motivator. Okay, so let's think about that for a minute, right? So that it's important, and this is how you get to these things. You want to have a discussion. The other thing that he said was it's important to him that the property manager and me stop bothering him. Okay, so you want people to stop bothering you. How do you get to that point? So these are all jumping off points that we can use, but it also tells you what the number is, right? Ultimately, we want to raise keeping housing, though that's pretty high. Most of my clients would have said keeping housing is a two. So we want to raise it a little bit. The drinking is a 10. Most of my clients would have said it was a 25, even though this is a scale from 1 to 10. So, okay, and we want to lower that a little bit. Are there other things that they did? Are they having possibilities where they had some fun when they were, abstinent? Those sorts of things. So we want to think about those and we want to re-measure it, right? And that's one of the ways that we can see progress. But it's important to understand what's important to people and have the conversation and get them to explain it to us. Okay. This is a decisional balance sheet. It works really well. We talked about this a minute. So, what does it look like to continue the behavior? What are the benefits? What are the costs? And what does it look like to make a change? And what are the benefits and what are the costs? And if you notice things about people, you can make suggestions, like you really like cooking, right? And if it's a problem, okay. So, what are the good things about drinking with friends? They need my help. That's a really important one. Homelessness can be very transactional, but it can also be people who really support each other. So they may feel like their friends need their help. They help them, they need their help. They may also be worried about if their friends will help them in the future when they lose their housing, which they might see as going to be something. I fit in, another big one. We have a good time. It's comfortable. Let me say something about good times. We've got to create good times with people when they are not using drugs or alcohol, which may be hard to get a point, or when they're in housing, right? If housing is all about paying rent, right? And, keeping your noise down and doing other things, if it's all about these things that are in the lease, which are important, it's not a good time, and people want to have something that's fun. They want to be friends with their neighbors. They want to be, and we need to find what that is and help people have something to look forward to every week in housing, right? So that's really important. We want to talk about the costs. Neighbors complain. I know you want it. It sounded to me like you wanted to be friends with your neighbors. Oftentimes people say, no, I don't. Okay, then we won't put that down, but they really do. Sometimes people get on my nerves. Oh, that's good. If your friend's starting to get on your nerves, we got a little in there where we can wiggle through, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes my friends don't leave. That's a big cost. You want to get at those things. And then making the change. I won't have a way to relax. I miss my friends. Nothing to do. Important. We have to understand that because we need to help people figure out ways to replace some of those things. People get off my back. Sam get some peace, be able to stay. The other thing is helping people imagine another life. And you can get this when we got one of the costs is to lose their friends. And we also found that this person is not only having people in their house, but they were also going back to the shelter to do different things. One of the things that we did is switch up their role a little bit in the shelter that we had more control of and ask them to help other people get housing and participate in a housing group. And they saw themselves as different from their friends. And it's sort of, I'm ashamed to say, wrecked it for them. But what the other part of it is that they could see another role. So that's part of this that we're figuring out with this cost and benefits. These tools are just a stepping ground. Does that make sense? The cost and benefits stuff I use all the time.
Do you actually use a template and you write it out with the participant, or this is just a framework for your own organization going into the conversation?
No, it's a good question. I do usually write it down because I want to confirm what people are saying, but I basically take a piece of paper and do a cross right in the middle and then
Hmm.
explain to them what each box is for. So I do sort of use a template. I don't use a really fancy one, but I usually use it on a cross on a piece of note paper. But then as we write it down, and I do it with the person, and oftentimes I give it to them, right?
Okay.
Afterwards, so that they can think about this. And oftentimes they'll come back to me and say, hey, I thought of another cost of making change. Okay. And you know what, bud? I thought of another benefit of making change. So let's compare those. This is a chart with stages of change, and it gives case managers some guidance about what to do, right? So, as you see in pre-contemplation, you look like you've been drinking, you look like you've been drinking. There's no awareness of the problem. Okay. So, you're going to raise questions that raise awareness of the obstacles to the goal or the behavior, right? So, the things like, you're going to ask questions like, I don't know, okay. It seemed like that, it seems like you're having a hard time staying awake, or it seems like, is that true, right? You're going to ask questions like, what do you think about this? Is it hard to do things like this? Wow, alcohol is expensive. What do you think about that? Is it, and sometimes people will say, well, not if you go to Costco. Okay, but then and you're getting people to think about it, right? Contemplation, you're going to do the pros and cons. The most important thing about this was revolutionary when it came out, is it's a chance to work with people before they're ready to change. In the old days, you guys all look too young for this, but when I first started work, you had to only work with people who were ready to change, which left about two people in the entire world. So, one of the things that we want to do is work with people before they're ready to change. So, this is really important, right? Preparation, you're going to talk about options, strategies. This is the most tempting, right? Remember, my nickname was Miss Detox, right? It's that when they start making plans, don't jump them, right? Because that's the thing, is you don't want to offer the solution right then, right? You want to figure out what their plans are. You want to add some things. I could probably get you in a detox if that was something you're interested in, which is very interested, is okay, choose between these two detoxes. Action, people are choosing behavior. You're going to support, and you're going to also do some relapse prevention, right? And then as people are in maintenance, you want to look for new goals that people are working on because that's critically important. And then as people relapse, we're going to return to the stage of change where they were at and start there. And just as a relief factor, in my experience, if you've been using these sort of staff tasks in the stages of change, usually if people do relapse, they go quicker. So they may start again in pre-contemplation, but they move quicker through the stages.
And you just investigate where they are based on open-ended questions to kind of
Yep,
figure out like,
yep,
okay, they relapsed, but they're ready to like start a new plan. They
yep.
or they're done with this and they don't want to, they just are going to continue drinking because there's no hope. They're like,
Then I would start them in pre-contemplation,
okay.
right? I would start them
Mhm.
in pre-contemplation, but I would have something to base it on because they've had some success moving through the stages.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
Usually there's hope, and you know what? It's a really good question because people do move through it a couple of times, and relapse is part of everything, part of
Yeah.
stages, part of change. It's
As is
frustrated,
resistance.
but yeah.
Resistance
Okay.
is part of it too. That's
Yeah, resistance
the
is often part of it,
Mhm.
right? And if people are pushing back, there's something going on, right? So back up a little bit. Sometimes I'm pushing too hard. Sometimes I'm giving instructions, right? Sometimes it's not a real goal for people. It's my goal, which is a form of pushing too hard. And that people have agreed to the goal just because they want me to shut up, basically. That's important. Sometimes they feel like control is being taken away, and that's really clear. I know you guys talked about trauma-informed care, and one of the things that people are most focused on is that control isn't taken away from them, and sometimes that can trigger something, so we want to be aware of that. So control might be an issue. Sometimes we need another strategy. Sometimes it's not working in ways that we don't understand. So we want to ask that. Is this not working for you? Can you tell me a little bit about what your experiences with this strategy? Does it seem like this is not the best strategy for you? Ask them those sorts of questions, right? So you just want to back up when there's resistance. It's not a rejection, and it's not a rejection of the goal entirely, right? Though sometimes people say, I don't want to stop drinking. Okay, okay. So once again, what's drinking going for you? What did you miss when you cut down on drinking, right? You want to ask those sorts of questions.
Do you try to reframe resistance in a way where
Yeah.
is there ever like you've got a lot on your plate right now and this you're really stressed out and I hear that you're stressed out so that what they're expressing as resistance is just an acknowledgement that they're overwhelmed or they're frustrated,
Yeah.
like it's not it's not a failure, in other words. Is that
Yeah, resistance is pretty much never a failure. It's just a technique to refocus. And yes, that's a really, I mean, a lot of times people are overwhelmed. They may be working on a lot of different things. And I would start with, sometimes it's just not the right timing, right?
hmm
And, is this something, and sometimes people, it's not their goal anymore. They want to work on something else that's more pressing.
hmm
Is this the thing you want to work on? And it's perfectly fine if people are resisting to back up, ask what they want to work on, even if you don't think it's the priority, but just be aware about how the different goal. You know what? I
hmm
don't want to work on drinking right now. I want to work on my housing. Okay. Okay. It can be a lot. We want to empathize with people and imagine
hmm
what this must be like for people and work on housing, but you're going to talk about, you can work on another goal, right? But
hmm
you can also bring up the issue about the first goal that they resisted and see if they want to, right?
Okay. Yeah.
You want to not jump into correct, fix things, right? You want to use reflection, right? Is this housing right for you? You know what? The other thing is, I don't know if you guys have ever been in this situation, but I've been in a situation where I'm trying to motivate people to keep their housing where really the issue is they hated their housing, which is a form of resistance. So we may want to ask them, is this housing working for you? It's not a promise to change their housing. Let's be clear about that because that's a very difficult process. but it may be a way that they can use this housing to access something they want more, right? And
Hmm.
that's usually the way that this resolves for me. But I want to know if they don't like their housing, because if you're trying to motivate people to keep housing they don't like, there's got to be a reason they're keeping it. So it may be to get a landlord's reference so they can get different housing, right? So you're going to introduce, I realized that housing was really tough. You had a tough history. Sometimes landlords, and these are landlords that we had a relationship with, but I recognize that this may not be what you want. So let's talk about what you want and let's talk about how we can use this housing to get that, right? And the truth is, if people have a good landlord reference, that's a good thing. Okay, wait a minute. Yeah, okay. So we're also going to support the person's ability to make decisions for themselves because let's face it, that's our goal. We are not promising lifetime case management. And if you are promising lifetime case management from you, right, that you're going to guide people for the rest of your life, then right now, write it down and send it to us. That you're going to never take another vacation, that you're never going to take a sick day, that you're going to be there forever. And if we're not, we need to get people to move on their own. So this is the part where tell me what went well in your last place. Tell me the things, right? Carrying out actions, what are the changing? Those are the questions that we talked about. You also want to build confidence in the way that they talk to the landlord. When you met with the landlord, I was really impressed with the questions you asked. Were you satisfied with the answers to these questions? Are these things that have come up in the past? How did you decide to ask the landlord the questions? You had your own place without any issues for many years. How did that work? Let them tell you the story. In Hawaii, they call it talk story. You want people to talk story and tell you stories of their successes and tell you stories of their struggles, but on the focus of where could they have used more help, right? Not how they could have done things differently, but where could they have used more help. And if they can talk to you about where they could use more help, we can point out where they were actually able to do those things. So we want to support that self-efficacy, that control that people have, and how they can solve their own problems. Because just like with anything else, like motivation, it's different for every person. You want them to tell you the story. If you're thinking this is going to take a while, you're right. This is going to take a while. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is a
All
case,
right.
right? All right.
Now we have a scenario that we're going to work through. This first one is Tony. I'll go ahead and read it, and
Okay.
then we're hoping that folks have thoughts employing motivational interviewing techniques to weigh in to how we might deal with Tony. Tony's been in housing for 6 months. He worked hard to get it, and he has little interest in seeing the service team now that he's in it. He's been drinking more over the past few months, and he stopped seeing his cardiologist because the cardiologist is nagging him about his drinking. His landlord is getting complaints from other tenants about all the noise because Tony's having his friends over. The worker has offered numerous ways to resolve these issues, but Tony wants no part of it and is increasingly hard to engage. Tony tells the team he will give up his housing before he gives up his friends. He likes some things about housing. He doesn't want the team to visit him because he wants people to stop telling him what to do. Does this sound familiar? This Tony scenario? What do folks think?
I wonder what Tony wants other than to be left alone.
Good
Yeah,
point.
yep. He's talking about hanging out with his friends, and he's talking about not, you know, following the advice of his doctor. He wants to be left alone. So he's maybe looking for some just personal space, some freedom, a place to, to sort of breathe and relax. But we need to, maybe we use the motivational interviewing techniques to just explore what's important to him. What is it about these friendships, or what is it about having housing that's gratifying to him? So that we're building out the sort of the pros of maintaining that housing rather than the cons. And maybe he doesn't understand the cons. I don't know if you can use motivational interviewing to help explore well, what would happen if we play this out and these behaviors continue? Is the housing at risk? Is your health at risk?
Yeah, you could. You absolutely could. But you also want to figure out, like, I mean, as a case manager in supportive housing, you are in their apartment, right? So is there something special about the apartment? Maybe they have a drawing from a member of their family. Maybe
Hmm.
you notice their kitchen is stocked, right? So get them to talk about that a little bit. You want to increase people's connection to their housing, right? You may want to ask them what kind of housing they want, right? So
Hmm.
part of it is thinking about what the goal is here. And what your goal is to get him to look at the fact that these behaviors are interfering with housing. And sometimes, I don't know if you've tried this. Sometimes we like introduce the lease. Look, these are hard, but he's already short-circuiting that by saying he'll leave, right? So maybe the goal is here to figure out exactly what he wants, exactly what kind of housing.
Hmm.
And it may be a conversation about future housing, and it may be a conversation about what he likes about his current housing.
Hmm. Okay.
What else here?
I would
People,
definitely,
so go ahead, Janice.
sorry, I would definitely lean into the friends and understanding
Yep.
maybe they have some space that, you know, he can go over there and
Yep.
enjoy some time over there, maybe just lessening the traffic in his unit. So that could be a suggestion. And like you mentioned earlier, maybe finding a different place where he can enjoy drinking. Of course, we're not encouraging drinking, but maybe just advising that there could be another location.
Yeah, and I mean, I think that that's a really smart thing to do. And you know what, Janice, is you're right. We're not encouraging drinking, but talking to people about how to modify their behavior around drinking means they're modifying their relationship with drinking, which is actually addressing a first part of addressing the drinking, right? So that you're right. Looking at other places where he can do it. That's actually how I found out that if people come to their house, right, that they bring booze. But the other thing I used to say is let's pick somebody else to go to their house, somebody not on my caseload. So that it's a joke, y'all, right? Because I just don't want to move the problem, but I don't actually say that. But I think that that's a really good point, and it helps them look at the alternatives. And just getting people to look at alternatives to their current behavior is starting the process. So that's a great one.
Okay. So we've already sort of been
Yep.
focusing on this, but any other things to consider?
I would want
Okay.
to ask
Oh,
Tony, oh,
Yep.
sorry to interrupt. I'd
No,
want to
no,
ask
you're good.
him what he likes about housing. I noticed
Yes.
there
Yes.
was a statement in there that he likes some things about housing. So I'd be
Yep.
really curious of like, tell me about that, Tony. You said you like some things about housing. Like, what are those things that you like?
Yep.
And kind
mhm.
of explore that with him.
Yep. That's going to help raise his motivation. Exactly.
Okay.
You guys got this. So housing focused case management, right? We're going to use this motivation, and motivation is one of the biggest things people bring up in housing focused case management. So we're going to do some assertive engagement using some of these techniques, right? Assertive engagement just means with just what Matt said. If somebody resists, do we give up? No. Right? We try another technique. We try another way to do it. So we're going to use motivational interviewing to engage people and engage them. Engagement is not only a process that becomes at the beginning, engagement is all along. And sometimes we lose people for different things. They may be overwhelmed, they don't want to work with us anymore. Okay, let's re engage them. Asking people what they want, asking about their friends, that's something they're interested in. Those are all motivated engagement techniques. We're going to do a comprehensive assessment and a housing plan. We're going to talk about the housing plan. We're going to participate in client-driven goals. We're going to use some of that so that principle. We're going to take a wellness approach that's recovery oriented. Everybody's life can be better, right? You know, One of my clients said to me once when we were actually in a termination phase is that, but you're the first person who tried to make my life better, right? And the truth was, he was the person that made try to make his life better. And we had to have that conversation, but we want to help people believe that they can have a better life. It's links to community supports. Those are critically important and those should outlast the case management. And then it's individualized, goal-based, and person-centered. Okay, let's talk about this for a minute. So we're going to do this quick. So this is the process of service planning, and that some of these repeat throughout: engagement, assessment. Assessment is a process, goal development, motivation building, and developing the plan. We're going to do all of those things over and over again because this is part of the process. Okay, let's go to the next one. The service plan guides then structures the work. It also identifies ways where people can identify progress. Goals are set in a partnership with the participant focused on what matters to them. We're going to go for felt goals, the so that principle. You want housing so that what happens? You want to get sober so that what happens? You want what they imagine life to be like. And those are their real felt goals. And we're going to connect those to the process of the more concrete goals we put on the plan, but the felt goals or the long-term goals are going to be on the plan, and we're going to connect them every time we discuss them. You want to make progress possible by identifying small steps so people can identify progress. Getting a ID is a huge goal, right? So that just getting to the place they get the ID, this could be a lost ID, this could be the original ID. We're going to really identify steps where they can do it. Okay. We're going to do short and long-term goals. Long-term goals are things like I want a girlfriend, I want a car, I want all different things. You want to try to limit the goals to no more than 3. This comes out of the research around critical time intervention. People get overwhelmed with more than 3 goals. I usually do no more than 2. You're going to focus on the things that are most critical for housing. These are the service plan goals, right? And they should all be connected to that long-term goal. You're going to use that plan to raise confidence, competence, and meaning. You're going to talk to people about the progress they've done, and you're going to identify skills they use to reach those goals. Progress helps build confidence. That's another argument for putting short-term tasks under your goal. Those are the action steps. We're going to target dates. They don't have to be the full goal plan. So getting an ID may be a month, right? Or if they were born in Texas, it may be a year. So we're going to do those sorts of things. We're going to include connections to high quality services. We're going to update the plan at least every 3 months for time limited programs, 6 months for PSH. Those are the requirements in Rhode Island, I'm assuming, right? So that but the most important thing is you revisit the plan and you take the plan with you every time you meet with clients, right? So part of your interview and part of your work with clients is to focus on the goal. And it's perfectly acceptable if in the middle of a plan people want to switch goals, right? Because as Matt said, when people get overwhelmed, it may not be their priority anymore. So we're going to think about switching goals, but we're going to keep in our head the old goals and bring them up so that they can be revisited. Okay. All right. So here's an update on Tony. Tony's cut down with his friend on his friends visiting. He's still drinking a lot, but mostly quiet in his apartment. That's a huge plus. He does not see the drinking itself as a problem he wants to solve, but he decided he wants to keep his place. His dream is to get a hunting cabin, and drinking is expensive. He feels lonely since he stopped having his friends over as much. Okay. We can go to the questions, or you guys can just comment on this. What do you think?
I would say, maybe there's an activity he and his friends could pick up,
Yes. Yes.
and drinking less or something when they, so he could still have friends over, but let's play poker or, do something.
Yep.
Maybe his friends want to go hunting with. I mean, I wouldn't
Yeah.
encourage using guns and hunting at this,
Yeah.
or drinking and, but if he likes
Yep.
hunting and he wants the hunting lodge, then maybe there's a, trapping, fishing, something, some other activity that is can engage with his friends.
What about the fact that he realizes that using is expensive? So we're going to offer to buy him.
Well, maybe, yeah, like the money you would spend, maybe put a little away for your hunting lodge.
Yep.
That's motivation.
Yep. Maybe doing a budget plan to show how much he can save towards the cabin. Good idea, Shania. Yep. We're changing their relationship, right? We're changing the relationship with the substances. And we're introducing other things that he may want as much.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. These are other resources that you have available to you. You can click on these. There's also a sample focused housing service plan, which we're going to talk about more, especially in the in-person training. So we want to think about that. Think about any questions you have. Think about any suggestions. This is a sample. It's not required at this point, right?
The sample housing service plan we put together as part of the packet that will be distributed
Yeah.
at the in-person meeting, and that's in 2 weeks. So we're going to be applying not just motivational interviewing, but all of the other housing-focused case management, goal planning, dealing with service resistant, all of the applications from the previous meetings we'll be applying in person, and we have a bunch of tools and templates and products that we're going to be distributing and practicing with when we're in person in 2 weeks. All
Derek had
right.
a question.
Yeah, please jump in.
Yeah, so I just want to say, like, I think these were a lot of like very helpful techniques, but I just want to signal something I've signaled at previous sessions, which is that the examples assumed we had some mechanism for housing these clients, if only we
Hmm.
could help them sort of, address whatever barriers they were running into. I have a lot of clients who might benefit from permanent supportive housing or from subsidized housing. And the best I can do is get them on those waiting lists. And
Yep.
so, I think I find it very challenging, right? I'm not someone who is a social worker who thinks I know what the client needs to do, and if only they would do it, it would work out. I'm someone who is trying to like find, how to best help clients manage situations in which we don't have adequate resources, and sometimes trying to shoehorn them into the small number of short-term assistance programs we have. So I think, yeah, anyway, thinking for maybe our in-person session or future sessions, thinking about how to deal with those situations where the
Yes.
problem, right, we may have behaviors of the client that they need to address or plans they need to
Hmm.
address, but that the primary barrier is the lack of resources, not the client's behavior.
Yeah. I think it's such a common, unfortunately, it's really a common issue where we're in a resource constraint environment and we don't, everyone would benefit from a subsidy. Everyone would benefit from services, and we don't have enough of those slots to guarantee that everyone's going to get them. So it changes the nature of the case management, the sort of the system design and the case management and the engagement focus when all you have to offer is putting someone on a list that's not actually going to materialize into an actual referral. And so we'll spend some time in 2 weeks, like what are some different options
Yeah.
that are available for participants, recognizing that a subsidy, that PSH ultimately would be the most beneficial, but we can explore sort of bridges or interim steps or other, it doesn't have to be permanent, but other kinds of interventions that are likely to provide some stabilization, and it's part of the pathway to housing. Some of this is system design, and some of it is just changing our orientation to how we interact and what services we offer, but we'll definitely focus on that in 2 weeks.
Yeah, and just to be clear, Derek, we're going to talk about some out of system options, right?
Mhm.
Because most people are going to have to go into those out of system options. We're also done a lot of work in other places about reuniting with families, some shared housing, not how people traditionally think about shared housing. We're not talking about, usually, we're not talking about, though we would consider it, two people in a program living together, but do they have a friend outside who could live together? Do they have a family member? Those sorts of things, and how to have those conversations. Because, yeah, we're going to need that sort of stuff. And we need to keep in mind that people need that level of support that may come from supportive housing. We're not going to duplicate that, but we're going to try to get some important pieces and what's important to people. And we're using some of these techniques to get there. But yeah, it's huge. And like Matt said, I would love it if everybody could get subsidized housing, but they're not.
We got a little bit of a late start, so I just wanted to recognize that there is other questions or comments. We can hang out for another minute or so, but we're at the end of our scheduled time. So if people have other things they have to get to, I appreciate that. But we'll finally have an opportunity to be in person in 2 weeks at the Warwick Library, Tuesday, I think it's the 21st. And we're looking forward to applying all of these techniques and actually activating responses in a way that's meaningful for you. So it's a little more practice oriented rather than lecture oriented, but there will still be some presentation.
Thanks so much for making this accommodation. I really appreciate it.
Doing a budget plan. Yep. Yep. Okay. Thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.
You.
Thank
All right.
you.